We're studying a study on restoration, and we're looking at different biblical characters that give us a good example of this subject, restoration. We're going to study a lesson today called The One Who Failed. It's the story of Absalom. Absalom. And when you talk about Absalom, it's regretfully one of those that we could not restore. That was not restored. He died in his rebellion. So let's examine the life of Absalom in this study on restoration. I'm going to use for my text the book of 2 Samuel, the 18th chapter and verse 14. Then Joab said, speaking to a man that had saw Absalom hanging by his hair in a tree. They were in a very wilderness area, a lot of trees, and Absalom's long hair was caught in the branches of this tree, left him hanging there. And Joab said, I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the tree. Now, it's well been said, the bend in the road isn't the end of the road unless we fail to negotiate the curve. And so when we talk about Absalom, it's regretfully one of those that failed to negotiate the curve. The story of Absalom is one of the saddest stories in the Bible. It's one of those tragic, heartbreaking stories, and yet it's put there as an example for you and I of the way not to live. God not only shows us the right way to live, but he also gives us examples of the wrong way to live, and Absalom is one of those stories. Now, the truth of it is, Absalom wasted so much potential. The young man had so many benefits, so many good things going for him, and yet he lost it all. Another statement we could say about Absalom is Absalom began innocent, but he ended up guilty. In other words, somebody had done his sister wrong, and because of what they had done to his sister, he became a very revengeful man and a very angry man, full of hatred and bitterness. And it destroyed him. So he began innocent. He's not the one that initiated the problem, but because of the way he responded to it, he ended up guilty, doing things that his brother and that his father had never done. What a tragic story. What it's a caution to you and I is, don't allow pain to become infection in your heart. Don't allow what somebody else has done to become a defining moment for you. And because they have done something bad, you end up doing something worse. That's what happened with Absalom. And it's a tragic, tragic story. Now, I want to begin by looking at Absalom's father. Absalom's father was King David. And let's look at David's life, where David failed as a father. What was it that David could have done that would have helped to have redeemed, to restore Absalom? He didn't have to end this way. And I think much of the guilt here is laid at the feet of David, because he's the one that had done some bad things. Number one in David's life, where he failed, was by the wrong example. The wrong example. The bad example was when David committed immorality with Bathsheba. It's when David commits adultery, he fails to give his son a good example. A good example. What a tragedy within his life. He has lost the right to talk to his sons about morality. He has no right. He's already forfeited that right by the wrong example. Now, it is something that we need to examine in our own lives. Am I setting the right kind of example? Am I showing the next generation the right way to live, a better way to live? David failed to do that. Someone has well said, David was a good king, but a bad father. There's some truth within that. Because when you look at his life, his sons start following his bad example. They're walking in their daddy's footprints. It's not the way they should go. And so it all begins in Absalom's life with the wrong example from his father. The second thing that I see in David's life that was a mistake was anger. Anger. This was David's outlet, the way that David responded to bad things. He just blew up and got angry about it. That doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't solve anything. David had become what we would call an angry king. An angry king. Let me give you a scripture reference for this. The book of 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, verse 21, it says, "But when King David heard of these things, he was very angry." That doesn't fix anything. It doesn't correct anything. It doesn't solve the problem. No, he just becomes angry. A lot of people do that. And they think because they become angry about something that's the right response. No, it was not the right response. And David's anger just simply is venting. That's all it's doing. It's just releasing his emotion. But this anger that he begins practicing for his oldest son, Amnon, he turns that same anger toward Absalom. His anger would not permit him to receive Absalom back into his life, even when he said he had forgiven Absalom for what he had done. The scripture reference for that is the book of 2 Samuel, the 14th chapter, verse 24. The king is talking about King David. King David said, let Absalom return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. Wow, that's a bad way to respond to what Absalom has done. If you're going to forgive him, then forgive him. If you're not going to forgive him, why bring him back to Jerusalem again? The next verses it says in 2 Samuel 14 and 28, "And Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face." It was a tragic mistake. What David is doing here is wrong. There is no father that should behave in this manner. For 2 years, Absalom is dwelling in Jerusalem, where his father, King David, is dwelling, and yet David refuses to speak to the boy, will not permit him into his presence. What happens? Anger starts building in the life of Absalom. Anger, it's like burning the fuse, and the fuse is getting shorter and shorter, and then will cause an explosion. And that's what happens in Absalom's life. It's one of the mistakes that King David had made. And then there's a third thing that I see where David failed. David failed in what I will call time. The truth of it is, all of us are running out of time. We are like clocks that are winding down. And if we do not use our time properly and wisely, we will find we have run out of time. King David waited until it was too late for him to mourn for Absalom. When David starts weeping and crying over Absalom, it was too late then, too late. Absalom was already dead, and there's nothing he can do about this tragic ending of his son's life. Let me read a scripture verse for you. In 2 Samuel, the 14th chapter and verse 33. "So Joab went to the king and told him. And when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom." What's the problem? He's waited too long. He's waited until there's bitterness already in the heart of Absalom. He's waited until anger is controlling this young man. He's full of hatred. The truth is, there's nothing that we can change once they are dead. And that's what King David did. He waited too long to mourn for his son. And because of that, Absalom's life ended in a tragic failure. David's tears cannot bring Absalom back to life again. And it ends a tragedy for both the father and the son. It's an example for you and I. Don't live this way. This is the wrong way to live. I remember many years ago, my girls saying to me about a particular person one day, there's nothing good about that person. I said, oh yes, there's something good about that person. They are a good example of how not to live. That's what David is providing, what Absalom is providing. Don't live this way. Now, let's talk about Absalom. Let's talk about where Absalom failed. What was it that Absalom did that could have been different if he would have changed some of his attitudes? Number one was a grudge that he held. He failed to forgive. He fails to forgive his brother. Instead, he murders his brother. Now, which would have been better, to forgiving him or murdering him? Quite obvious. Forgiveness is the best decision, the best choice. Now, why was it that he murders him? He murders him because he will not forgive him for what he has done. Again, this is found in 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, and verse 22. Absalom spoke to his brother Amnon, neither good nor bad. He's acting like his father. He's not saying anything. For Absalom hated Amnon because he had forced his sister Tamar. What Amnon had done was a terrible, terrible deed. There's no way it can be justified. Nothing good that can be said about it. But what Absalom does, he becomes a murderer of his brother. Amnon was the oldest son of King David. Absalom was the second son of King David. These are David's oldest boys, and yet they are acting like enemies. And so, after 2 years of harboring this hatred, Absalom comes up with a plan. And you find this in 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, and verse 28. Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, watch now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine. In other words, they're going to get him drunk. Keep giving him alcohol until he's drunk and is not able to defend himself. When his heart is merry with wine, and when I say, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not be afraid. Wow. What terrible words. The man has become a murderer of his own brother. Why does he do it? Because he refused to forgive him. Now, it's bad enough what he did in murdering his brother. But then you find later that Absalom rises up against his father, King David, tries to overthrow the throne, and David flees for his life. He leaves 10 of his concubines behind in the palace in Jerusalem to take care of the palace. When Absalom returns, comes back to Jerusalem, because he refused to forgive his father. He didn't just refuse to forgive his brother. He's carrying a grudge against his father. He ends up raping those 10 women. What a tragic story. Absalom is now 10 times worse than the man he murdered. He has raped these 10 women. Oh, it's a tragic story. Let me read the verse that defines this and shows you that I'm telling you the truth. 2 Samuel, the 16th chapter, in verse 21. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go in to your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. What bitter words, what terrible words, what terrible counsel. But Absalom follows that counsel. Now, what Ahithophel is doing is making sure that Absalom and his father, King David, can never be reconciled together again. What he has done is so terrible, there is no way that they're ever going to make peace again. See, the truth of it is, when we refuse to forgive others, we become trapped in our own pain. Or another way of saying this is we become like the people we don't like. That's what's happened to Absalom. Absalom has become a more despicable person than the people that he despised. He's become a worse person, a murderer, 10 times a rapist. What a horrible, horrible thing that this young man has allowed to happen in his life. And it all goes back to carrying a grudge. You can't afford to do that, my friend. You cannot afford to do that. You must learn to forgive anyone of anything that they have done against you. If not, that grudge will define who you are. That grudge will destroy you, and you will become a shell of the person that God intended for you to be. Jesus said it this way when he was teaching us how to pray. Matthew, the 6th chapter and verse 15. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Wow, what powerful words, and what a caution to every one of us. Don't play God and pretend that you are better than other people. We're not. We must learn to forgive. The Apostle John puts it this way in 1 John 4:20. John says, for if someone says, I love God, and yet hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? Those are powerful words, but they apply to us in a very practical way. If we do not forgive, then we cannot be forgiven. That's what has happened in Absalom's life. Another way of saying this is, it's impossible to be right with God and wrong with man. You can't do it, friend. There's no way. If you don't love the one that you have seen, how can you love the one whom you have not seen? Now, let me talk about a second thing in Absalom's life. The second place where he failed is the area of pride. And I believe this connects very well with the grudge, because with the grudge, he's comparing himself to others, which the Bible said that is not wise to do that. He thinks he's better than them, but ends up acting worse than them. How can he do that? Pride. The Bible tells us that Absalom was the most handsome man in Israel. Let me give you the verse of scripture for this. 2 Samuel, the 14th chapter and verse 25. Now in all Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Now, the Bible doesn't say that about me. The Bible doesn't say that about you. But it says of Absalom, he was so handsome, you couldn't find any blemish in him. Wow, what a powerful statement. And yet, the problem for Absalom is his good looks turned to vanity. It turned to vanity. And that's what happens to so many people in life. They have such a great gift, the gift ends up destroying them. That's what happens for Absalom. For instance, Absalom's hair. In 2 Samuel, the 14th chapter, verse 26, it shows how extreme Absalom's pride has become, how vain he has become. It said, when Absalom cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year, he cut it because it was heavy on him. In other words, he grew a lot of hair. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head. Now, every time I read that, I want to laugh. How ridiculous. It's not enough to grow the hair, but then you, sweep that all up now and weigh it. See how much hair I grew this year. How vain can you be? You talk about a man that is proud of his looks, proud of his hair. Oh, my. How foolish. The problem was pride. Pride. That's the root problem. And the Bible warns us about this, that pride goes before a fall, a haughty spirit before destruction. The man is setting himself up for his own destruction by his pride. His pride. I remember several years ago, a lady was telling me her husband loved to witness to people that he would meet along the road. And many of these, of course, they look like bums. They smell like bums. But boy, they had long, curly, wavy hair. He would bring them home and feed them and then offer them a shower, which they needed. And she said, I got so frustrated with my husband because these men are coming in, they're using up all of my hair products because they're taking good care of their hair. They don't have anything. They haven't got any money, haven't got a roof over their head, don't have a family. But they've got some real wavy, curly locks. Well, Absalom had it better than that as a prince, but what vanity in his life. He ends up building himself a tower in the King's Valley. Now, the tower, it doesn't benefit anybody but Absalom. And the reason he said he did it is found in 2 Samuel, the 18th chapter and verse 18. Now, Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the King's Valley. Beware of building your own pillars. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. How foolish. Do you realize monuments make poor substitutes for sons? What a foolish decision. Instead of investing in young men's life, if he doesn't have a son of his own natural, then why doesn't he adopt a son? If he doesn't have his own natural son, he can adopt other boys. But instead, he's trying to build a name for himself, setting himself up a pillar. A big mistake. The third mistake I see in Absalom's life, where he failed, was the friends that he chose. Show me your friends, I will show you your future. That's right. Absalom chose the wrong friends, the wrong people to be around him, the wrong people that he was going to spend time with them. You will become like them. Be careful who you choose. In the story of Absalom, 2 Samuel, the 15th chapter, and verse 31, someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Ahithophel at one time had been the friend of David. He's turned against David. The name of Ahithophel, it literally means the brother of a fool. What a powerful, powerful word. The brother of a fool. And that's who Absalom had chosen to be his best friend. Now, when you research the story farther, you discover Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. Now it starts coming together. We begin understanding this is why Ahithophel was so angry with David. This is why he refuses to forgive King David. What has Absalom done? Absalom has found someone that is just as bitter as himself, Ahithophel. Ahithophel. The counsel that Ahithophel gave to him was horrible counsel, terrible counsel. It was pure evil, pure evil. Oh yes, it was shrewd, it was smart, but it was evil at its heart. It's because of his bitterness. He's surrounded himself with the wrong people. Bathsheba was the woman with whom David committed adultery. And because of David's sin with Bathsheba, Her grandfather, Ahithophel, who had been David's friend, turns on David and now is looking for a way of revenge, a way of getting even with David. My, what a tragic story. Ahithophel refuses to forgive David because of what the king had done to his family. I think that the example here is so clear. Now we see why Absalom died the way that he died. In fact, the scripture records that Ahithophel, when his counsel had been turned into foolishness, when God had answered David's prayer, when his counsel was turned to foolishness, the Bible said Ahithophel went home, set his house in order, and hanged himself. It's tragic when you look at the story of Absalom. Both Ahithophel and Absalom died by hanging. What tragedy. It did not have to be this way. This was not God's will for their life. No, but because of choosing the wrong friends, because of refusing to forgive, because of their pride, they thought they were better than David and ended up acting worse than David. What a tragic example, and yet it is a warning to every one of us. Beware, beware, lest we become like Absalom, lest we become one that is a deceiver, rebellious, one that is trying to kill his own daddy. That's Absalom. And this story ends up in tragedy. His father weeping too late. God help us not to be like Absalom, the one that failed. God's will for us is to forgive and be set free, to be restored from whatever we have experienced in life. May God bless you on your Christian journey.